We grow up fearing the devil. We are taught that he is the source of all evil, the tempter in the shadows, the ruler of hell. But what if I told you that the devil is an amateur? Thousands of years before the concept of Satan even existed, humanity bowed down to entities far more terrifying. These were not fallen angels. They were gods. They were the creators, the sustainers, and the rulers of the universe. Yet they demanded payments that would make a demon shudder. They asked for the hearts of warriors while they were still beating. They asked for the skin of young women to be worn like a cloak. They asked for infants to be thrown into roaring fires while their parents watched in silence. The devil might want your soul, but these gods wanted your flesh, your blood, and your absolute agony. History has tried to forget them, to bury their altars under the sands of time, but their legends remain. Before we continue, please help by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing. I hope you are always healthy. We begin our descent not in the dark corners of forbidden cults, but at the very peak of Mount Olympus. The first deity on our list is the one most people consider a hero, a father figure, and the king of the gods. But underneath the white marble statues and the epic poetry lies a personality profile that, by modern standards, fits a serial predator and a tyrannical sociopath. Zeus is the ultimate example of absolute power corrupting absolutely, while pop culture portrays him as a wise ruler with a lightning bolt. The original myths paint a picture of a deity who viewed humanity and lesser creatures merely as toys for his amusement and vessels for his lust. The conflict begins with the story of Lycaon. King Lycaon, doubtful of Zeus's divinity, attempted to test the god by serving him a meal made of human flesh. A rational deity might have simply refused or punished the king. Zeus, however, exploded in a rage that devastated the entire region. He turned Lycaon into a wolf, condemning him to eternal beasthood. But his rage didn't stop there. Because of the actions of one man, Zeus decided that the entire human race was irredeemable. He unleashed the great deluge, a flood meant to drown every man, woman, and child. On Earth, this wasn't justice. It was a temper tantrum on a planetary scale. His cruelty was even more personal in his relationships. The list of his victims is endless. He transformed Io into a cow to hide his infidelity, leaving her to be tormented by a gadfly that chased her across the world. He deceived Alcmene by pretending to be her husband to sleep with her. He kidnapped Europa in the form of a bull. These were not romantic trysts. They were non-consensual acts of domination committed by a god who knew no consequences. He punished Prometheus, the titan who actually cared for humans, by having an eagle eat his liver every single day for eternity. Zeus represents the terror of a ruler who has no accountability. A god who can ruin your life simply because he finds you attractive or annoying, leaving a trail of trauma that echoes through Greek mythology. Moving north to the icy lands of Scandinavia, we encounter another figure often romanticized in modern media. Odin, the Allfather, is frequently depicted as a wise, one-eyed grandfather who guides heroes to valor. But to the ancient Vikings, Odin was not safe. He was terrifying. He was not a god of justice. He was the god of frenzy, war, and death. His titles reveal his true nature: the Terrible One, the Father of the Slain, and the Lord of the Gallows. Odin did not care about peace. In fact, peace was contrary to his goals. He needed bodies. The character of Odin is defined by a ruthless pragmatism. He knew that Ragnarok, the end of the world, was coming, and he needed an army of dead warriors, the Einarga, to fight for him. Therefore, Odin would intentionally incite wars between human tribes. He would sow discord among kings who were previously allies, whispering paranoia into their ears until swords were drawn. He would pick a favorite hero, bless him with victory after victory to build up his strength, and then, at the height of the hero's prime, Odin would betray him. He would cause the hero's sword to break or his foot to slip, ensuring the warrior died violently on the battlefield. This wasn't malice, it was harvesting. He treated human lives like crops to be cut down when they were ripe. One of the most disturbing aspects of Odin's worship was the ritual of hanging. Odin himself hung from the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 days to gain wisdom, stabbing himself with a spear. In imitation of this, his followers would conduct human sacrifices by hanging victims from trees and piercing them with spears. The wind blowing through the hanging corpses was said to be Odin's breath. He was a god of mania, the inspiration behind the berserkers warriors who entered a trance-like fury, biting their shields and killing indiscriminately. Odin represents the horror of a deity who views humans not as children, but as ammunition. He is the cold calculation of war, where individual suffering is irrelevant to the grand strategy. As we cross the Mediterranean to the ancient city of Carthage, the nature of divine cruelty shifts from the whims of a king to the systemic nightmare of a society. Here, the horror was not hidden. It was institutionalized. The deity known as Moloch, or possibly a type of sacrifice called MLK, represents one of the darkest chapters in human history. The conflict here is internal, a Ghanesian choice forced upon parents by a theology that demanded the ultimate price for prosperity. Moloch was not satisfied with the blood of animals or the prayers of priests. He demanded the future. The bronze statues of Moloch were constructed as intricate furnaces. They were fashioned with outstretched arms, slightly sloped downward toward an open, burning belly. The historical accounts, though debated, paint a scene of absolute dread. During times of crisis, plague, or war, the priests would light the fires inside the statue until the bronze glowed red. The foreshadowing of doom would hang over the city as the wealthy and powerful were expected to lead by example. They would bring their own infants, their firstborns, dressed in their finest clothes, to the place of sacrifice, known as the Tophet. What makes Moloch terrifying is the calculated nature of the ritual. It wasn't a frenzy, it was a solemn ceremony. Ancient writers described how musicians would play flutes and drums loudly during the sacrifice. This wasn't to honor the god with music. It was to drown out the screams of the burning children so that the parents would not hear them and be moved to tears. Crying was forbidden, as it was believed to nullify the value of the sacrifice. The parents had to watch stoically as their lineage was turned to ash. Moloch represents the terrifying idea that success, safety, and national security require the sacrifice of innocence. He is the god of the transaction. Give me what you love most, and I will let you live. We travel now to the Valley of Mexico, to the heart of the Aztec Empire, Tezcatlipoca. Here, the stakes of worship were raised to a cosmic level. The god Huitzilopochtli was the patron deity of the Aztecs, the god of sun and war. But he was a god with a terrifying weakness. In Aztec cosmology, the sun was not an eternal ball of gas. It was a warrior fighting a constant battle against the darkness of the night, and this warrior was constantly starving. If he was not fed, he would grow weak. If egre weak, the night would win, the sun would stop moving, and the universe would die. The foreshadowing of this cosmic apocalypse created a society driven by anxiety and blood. Huitzilopochtli demanded chalkihutl, the precious water, which was human blood. But not just any blood he needed, the energy found in the living heart. This belief turned the Aztec Empire into a machine designed to capture humans. They engaged in flower wars, battles fought not to kill the enemy or take territory, but specifically to capture live prisoners for the altar. The antagonist here was the sun itself. It hung in the sky like a ticking clock, demanding fuel. The rituals were industrial in scale. During the rededication of the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan, it is said that thousands of victims were sacrificed over the course of 4 days. The lines of captives stretched 4 miles. They were marched up the steps of the temple, stretched over a stone, and had their chests sliced open with obsidian knives. The priest would reach in, tear out the still beating heart, and hold it up to the sun god. The body was then tumbled down the steps. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a desperate, bloody maintenance of reality. Huitzilopochtli represents the horror of a theology where human life is the only currency that keeps the lights on, while Huitzilopochtli was the visible terror of the sun. His brother Tezcatlipoca was the invisible terror of the shadows. His name means smoking mirror, referring to the obsidian mirrors used for divination and sorcery. He was the god of the night sky, ancestral memory, and time. But more importantly, he was the god of arbitrary destiny. If Huitzilopochtli was the hungry soldier, Tezcatlipoca was the cruel trickster who toyed with human lives. He was omnipotent, omnipresent, and completely unpredictable. The tension in worshipping Tezcatlipoca came from the fact that he gave and took away without reason. He could elevate a slave to a king, and in the next moment, cast a king into the mud. He created conflict and discord simply to test humanity. It was Kajed, the enemy of both sides. He would incite wars just to see who would survive. No one was safe from his gaze. Aztec rulers would humble themselves before his image, terrified that he would suddenly decide to end their reign. He was the embodiment of the chaotic, unfair nature of life, but with a malicious intelligence behind it. Every year, the Aztecs selected a young, handsome man to impersonate Tezcatlipoca. For 1 year, this man was treated like a god. He was given the finest clothes, best food, and 4 wives. He walked the streets playing a flute, and people bowed to him. It was a life of absolute luxury. But the young man knew the truth. It was a psychological torture. At the end of the year, the luxury would stop. He would be marched up the temple steps, his flute broken, and his heart ripped out. Tezcatlipoca represents the cruelty of giving someone everything, only to take it all away. He is the god who reminds us that happiness is fragile and that destiny is a cruel master. We reach the turning point of our journey into divine horror with a deity whose rituals are arguably the most gruesome in human history. Xipe Totec, our Lord the Flayed One. He was an agricultural god, associated with spring, rebirth, and the new vegetation covering the earth. In a twisted logic, the Aztecs believed that just as a seed must burst open its shell to allow the new plant to grow, a human must be husked to release life. But the metaphor was taken literally. The worship of Xipe Totec involved a festival called Tlacusi. It began with the usual sacrifice of war captives. But death was not the end. The priests would take the fresh corpses and meticulously skin them. They would remove the entire skin of the victim face, limbs, and torso, often in one piece. The priests would then dye these skins yellow to resemble gold or corn leaves and wear them. For 20 days, the priests danced, sang, and performed rituals while wearing the rotting, flayed skins of the victims. They became the living image of the god. This visual is the stuff of nightmares. Imagine a man dancing in the street, looking through the empty eye holes of another man's face, the loose, dead skin flapping as he moves, representing the new layer of earth covering the ground. To the Aztecs, this was a sacred act of regeneration. To us, it is body horror at its absolute peak. The turning point here is the realization that this wasn't done in the dark. It was a public celebration. People cheered. The victims were sometimes forced to fight in mock gladiatorial battles while tethered to a stone before being skinned. Xipe Totec represents the grotesque intersection of life and death, where the most beautiful concept springtimes birthed through the most horrific act imaginable. We leave the jungles of Mexico and travel to the frozen forests of Finland. In the epimythology of the Kalevala, we find a figure who embodies the very essence of suffering. While other gods inflict pain as a punishment or a requirement for ritual, Loviatar inflicts pain because it is her nature. She is the blind daughter of Tuoni, the god of death. She is described as the ugliest, most terrifying of the death, a whore of the underworld who is pregnant with the worst miseries known to man. The conflict here explodes into the realm of biological warfare. Loviatar is not worshipped for blessings. Sais feared. The legend states that she was impregnated by the wind, a cold eastern wind that chilled the bones. After a terrible gestation, she gave birth to 9 sons. These were not gods or heroes. They were diseases. Her children were colic, pleurisy, fever, ulcer, plague, consumption, gout, sterility, and cancer. She is the mother of pathology. Unlike the Aztec gods who killed quickly, Loviatar's cruelty is slow. She is the ache in the joints that never goes away. She is the fever that burns a child in the night. She is the slow wasting away of the body. In Finnish folklore, she was banished by the hero Viniminen, but her children remained to torment humanity. Loviatar represents the seemingly senseless cruelty of nature. She gives a face to the random, agonizing illnesses that strike without warning. She is the goddess of the hospice, the deity of the terminal ward, the silent, blind mother who birthed the things that eat us from the inside out. As we approach the climax of our list, we confront a deity whose very name means black god.
In the pre-Christian Slavic mythology of Eastern Europe, the world was a balance between the dualities of light and dark. Chernobog was the white god, representing goodness and light. Chernobog was his shadow, but Chernobog was not just the god of night. He was the active principle of evil. While details on him are scarce and often reconstructed by later chroniclers, the fear he inspired was palpable. The climax of cruelty lies in Chernobog's motivation or lack thereof. Other gods we've discussed had reasons: feeding the sun, winning wars, ensuring harvest. Chernobog seems to be malicious simply because that is his function.
He was associated with cold, famine, poverty, and illness. At feasts, the ancient Slavs would pass a bowl around and utter curses in his name, not to invite him, but to acknowledge his power in hopes of keeping him away. He was the god you didn't want to notice you. In later folklore and artistic representations, like Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, Chernobog is depicted as a demonic figure, summoning the spirits of the dead for a midnight Sabbath. He revels in chaos. He is the bad luck that ruins a harvest. He is the accident that cripples a village. He represents the devil. Archetype before Christianity arrived in the region of force of darkness that opposes the light, not for gain, but out of essential nature. He is the void that stares back. The horror of Chernobog is the horror of the inevitable misfortune that plagues human existence, personified in a being that cannot be bargained with, only feared. In our resolution phase, we encounter a twist that recontextualizes everything we have discussed. The Gnostics, a mystic sect of early Christianity and Judaism, proposed a terrifying idea. What if the God who created this world is actually the villain? They called this figure the Demiurge, often named Yaldabaoth. According to Gnostic theology, the true, ultimate God is a being of pure light and spirit, completely removed from the physical world. The physical universe, with all its pain, decay, and death, was created by a lesser, ignorant, and arrogant deity. The Demiurge believes he is the only God. He is jealous, angry, and flawed. He trapped divine sparks human souls inside prisons of flesh human bodies to be tormented by hunger, disease, and time. In this view, the God of the Old Testament, who demands burnt offerings, commands genocides, and punishes with plagues, is actually this false creator. He is not evil in the chaotic sense of Chernobog, but evil in the authoritarian sense. He is the jailer of humanity. This perspective offers a profound, albeit disturbing, explanation for the cruelty of the gods we have looked at. Why do gods demand blood? Because they are part of a flawed system. Why is there suffering? Because the architect of the world was incompetent or malicious. The Demiurge represents the ultimate cosmic betrayal, the realization that the father figure of the universe might actually be a monster who feeds on our worship to sustain his own ego. It is a theological horror story where the only escape is to wake up and realize the game is rigged. We end our journey at the end of all things. In ancient Egypt, the gods fought to maintain Moat order, but lurking in the darkness of the Duat, the underworld was the ultimate threat. Apophis or Apop. Apophis was not a god in the traditional sense. He was the embodiment of Xipe chaos. He appeared as a colossal serpent whose only goal was to swallow the sun god Ra and plunge the universe back into the primordial ocean of nothingness. Apophis is the fitting conclusion because he represents the death of all mythology. He doesn't want worshippers. He doesn't want sacrifices. He wants silence. Every night, the Egyptians believed Ra battled if Ra lost, the sun would not rise. The priests would perform rituals to burn wax effigies of snakes, spitting on them and cursing them to help Ra in his fight. It was a daily battle for existence. The moral of our journey through these 10 cruel deities is a reflection on humanity itself. We created these gods. We projected our deepest fears of war, of starvation, of disease, of the Darkantu, the canvas of the cosmos. We gave them names and built them altars. We were so terrified of the randomness of the universe that we preferred to believe in cruel monsters that could be bargained with, rather than accept a universe that was indifferent to us. We sacrificed our children to Moloch because we thought it gave us control. We tore out hearts for Huitzilopochtli because we thought it saved the sun. These gods are monsters. Yes, but they are our monsters. They are the nightmares we dreamt up to explain why the world hurts. And in the end, the most horrifying thing isn't the gods themselves, but what we were willing to do to please them. And maybe, just maybe, the real question isn't, are the gods cruel? But rather, why do we need them to be cruel? If this journey through the darkest corners of mythology has you questioning the history of belief and human nature itself, then this is just the beginning, because there are still forgotten gods buried in the sands of time. There are still ancient horrors whispered in long-ruined temples. There are still myths that reveal uncomfortable truths about who we are. So, if you're ready to explore the shadows of history, if you want to dive deeper into God's monsters and the psychology behind belief, subscribe and join me for the next investigation, because ultimately, the scariest stories aren't about the gods. They're about us.